Melbourne's Akadaka Accolade.
It's good to be back here in the ancestral home of AC/DC.
Brian Johnson, 78 years old. Angus Young, 70. Together, they... For fans, Hell's Bells, Heaven Sent. Nick McCallum, 7 News.
From high atop the battlements of a rainy and windswept CaptainCurmudgeon, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the Blast Radius. So good of you to join us tonight, and we open with a special programming advisory. The Worst People in the Whole Wide World weekly update will not be seen in its normal time slot this week, so that we can bring you this special presentation of monologue that's been living inside the host's head for several days and desperately needs to escape. Why does it need to escape? Because we need to talk about AC/DC. Actually, we need to talk about rock music more broadly, but we're going to open with the band that bills itself as AC/DC, which, as some of you may know, is currently playing a 10-date Australian tour, working their way from east to west, filling all of the biggest cricket grounds and football stadiums in the country with rapturous admirers, receiving glowingly positive reviews in the press, and so on. And that's all well and good. I don't begrudge anyone the right to make money. I don't begrudge anyone the right to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars to spend 2.5 hours trying to relive their youth, or their parents' youth, or their grandparents' youth, as the case may be. The question that I want to grapple with is, to what extent is the band on the stage actually AC/DC? I mean, in the videos that I'm watching from these shows, I see a silver-haired 70-year-old Angus Young still cavorting about in his schoolboy knickers, and I see a 78-year-old Brian Johnson still belting out the vocals, and they both sound fine. Let's not be in any doubt about that. In fact, I don't know what kind of special tea he's been drinking, but to my ears, Brian sounds better at 78, much better in fact, than he did at 48. And as far as Angus goes, the physicality is more subdued than it used to be. I'm relieved to see he's leaving his shirt on now and no longer doing the striptease routine. The duck walk looks more like a jaunty little skip now, but to whatever extent he has been affected by the ravages of Father Time, those ravages haven't spread to his fingers to any appreciable degree. I am more concerned with what I see when I look behind the two frontmen. On the drums, I see some guy. On the bass, I see some other guy. And on rhythm guitar, I see a man who is not Malcolm Young. Because Malcolm Young died 9 years ago now. And I have a problem with a band billing itself as AC/DC, still making records and playing shows almost a decade after the funeral of the guy whose band it was. Especially with some guy on bass and some other guy on the drums. As far as Stevie Young goes, I mean him no disrespect. His uncle Angus asked him to step in for his uncle Malcolm when the latter uncle was struck down with the early onset dementia that ultimately claimed his life at the age of 64. He said he would do it. He's a fine guitar player, and he has filled those shoes as capably as anyone else could have done. And 11 years ago, I understood the stated rationale when Angus announced that Malcolm's not going to be able to play anymore, but we had this set of songs written for a new album, so we are going to record it with Stevie and we will release it as a tribute to my brother. But that was 2 albums and 2 world tours ago, which impels me to ask, what are we actually doing here, Angus? And it also impels me to ask, where is the dividing line between a band and a brand? One of the sources of AC/DC's credibility as a live act for a long time was that when you went to see one of their shows, the guys on the stage were the Back in Black lineup. Malcolm Young, Angus Young, Phil Rudd, Cliff Williams, Brian Johnson, with the exception of the regrettable drummer changes that happened between 1985 and 1992, there was a period of 38 years when the lineup was the lineup, and that mattered. Especially in a world where there are so many bands that are just one original core member and a rotating cast of sidemen, still recording god-awful dog-shit albums, still playing god-awful dog-shit live shows, wringing every last ill-gotten penny that can be wrung out of whatever nostalgic attachment the public still has for the brand name. And if that description makes you think of Black Sabbath during most of the 1980s and 90s, it should. And more on them in a moment. But I never wanted AC/DC to be one of those bands, and I never thought they would be. It never would have occurred to me in a million years that Angus Young would have continued recording and touring under the AC/DC name with Malcolm Young no longer alive. That hurts me in my heart. And as someone who is probably in the 99th percentile of the world population as far as the amount of time and attention and money and travel I have invested in being an AC/DC fan, I think I should have at least earned the right to find this all just slightly offensive. For the people who are going to these Australia shows and the other shows they've been playing around the world, I hope they enjoyed themselves. I certainly never didn't enjoy myself at any of the 20-plus AC/DC shows I attended over the years, but later on in life, when those people say, yeah, I saw AC/DC once back in 2025, did they really see AC/DC? Or did they see Angus Young, Brian Johnson, some guy, some other guy, and not Malcolm Young? And if we open the aperture a bit more broadly, rock music in general seems to be in a very strange place in its existence, a stone-dead artistic idiom for which a great deal of demand still exists. Setting aside the question of whether the band currently performing under the AC/DC banner is actually AC/DC, how many other rock acts can you think of who can fill a stadium anywhere in the world by themselves in a non-festival setting? 83-year-old Paul McCartney? The 80-something-year-old Rolling Stones? Maybe the Foo Fighters? I'm hard-pressed to think of any others. Here's another pertinent question. Can you think of anyone who is a rock star in the traditional sense who is under the age of 50? Me either. Better yet, can you name any rock band of any cultural relevance that originated in the current century? Me either. It is an exceedingly strange thing to consider. The fact that the crowds at these stadium shows contain plenty of people in their teens and 20s and 30s, but the acts they most want to see are all in their 60s and 70s and 80s, and the songs they are most eager to hear were released decades before they were born. And it's an even stranger thing to consider in light of the fact that rock music originated as an idiom that was supposed to be played by young people for young people, which brings me along to another big stadium show that took place not long ago at Villa Park in Birmingham back in July, when Ozzy Osbourne, a man who had no business being any place but in hospice care, was dragged off his deathbed, propped up in a chair on stage, and mumbled his way through 2 4-song sets that almost certainly hastened the coming of his death 2 weeks later. I know we're supposed to pretend this was a wonderful, awesome, inspiring thing, but was it? Or was it cruel, exploitative, and really quite sad? I know this is an unpopular take. I know we're supposed to view this spectacle through rose-colored glasses and to hear it through rose-colored headphones, but I thought it was much closer to the latter thing than the former. In fact, watching it really made me uncomfortable. Was there any good reason why the original members of Black Sabbath needed to reunite and play 4 songs together in their late 70s? Except to bring their lead singer uncomfortably close to being the real-life version of the fictional Dewey Cox, who got the old band back together and then promptly dropped dead on stage at the end of his last performance? Spoiler alert, no, there wasn't. If your actual life ends in a way that is eerily reminiscent of a parody movie, I don't see anything about that is rock and roll. There is never anything dignified about life imitating parody. They designed that event, Back to the Beginning I believe it was called, to be sort of the Woodstock of heavy metal, and once again, you had a sellout crowd of people primarily under age 40 rocking out to the geriatric machinations of a bunch of pensioners in leather trousers playing songs that originally came out on vinyl records. How did rock music and heavy metal come to this? Back when they were in their heyday, would any of these performers have wanted to wind up as wig-wearing nostalgia acts? I strongly suspect not. When you take off the rose-colored glasses and the rose-colored headphones, was there anything really that great about seeing a guy like Axl Rose with his voice so completely shot he sounds like a syphilitic meerkat making love to a belt sander? Was there anything really that great about seeing Ozzy Osbourne with 1.5 feet in the grave struggling so badly they had to put a 2-hour delay on the feed of the live stream so they could have time to pitch correct the vocals? I know Ozzy wanted very badly to do it. I know the people of Birmingham wanted very badly to bid farewell to him and to Sabbath. I know a lot of money was raised for charity, and that is all well and good. But a collective mutual thirst for a hit of nostalgic dopamine doesn't necessarily make a thing a good idea, and it doesn't make it not cruel, exploitative, and sad. And here's another unfashionable take incoming. I also think Sharon Osbourne has to be taken to task for making the last 5 years of her husband's life into a rather grotesque exercise in something that is closer to pornography than documentary. There's a film currently streaming on Paramount Plus, I think it is, that's just about the most uncomfortable 2 hours I have ever spent. What sort of a person invites a film crew into her house to painstakingly document the death throes of their spouse? Do you do that to your life partner? I know she is very fond of hiding behind the charge of exploitation by saying the proceeds from the concert went to charity. But you obviously made plenty of money from that documentary, which is just about the most undignified thing that can possibly be imagined. And I also know there's a theatrical concert film coming out next year, and you will make plenty of money from that too. So I think, Mrs. Osbourne, you're perhaps not quite as well insulated from charges of exploitation as you might like to think you are. And it was difficult not to scoff at her claims toward the tail end of the documentary that, oh, I just want to get Ozzy through this last thing, and then we can go quietly spend the rest of our lives together. Because I feel like if you wanted to spend the rest of your lives together, and for those lives to amount to longer than the 17 days it wound up being in the actual event, you wouldn't have been doing this to that poor man, and you wouldn't be capturing his every frailty in painstaking detail for the consumption of the whole world. In other words, I feel like the actions make the words ring more than a little bit hollow. If I should ever wind up as diminished and incapacitated as Mr. Osborne was at the end of his life, I should hope I would be treated better by my wife. But everybody got their little delicious hit of nostalgia dopamine, didn't they? And the people of Birmingham got a one-day distraction from the fact that their English city is now so heavily Muslim that less than 90 days after this concert at the same stadium, when Aston Villa played a match against Maccabi Tel Aviv, the British government had to ban Maccabi's fans from attending the game because it's just too dangerous to have Jewish soccer fans come into the city. Bread and circuses, ladies and gentlemen. Bread and circuses. But back to the larger point, how is it that rock music went from being exclusively by young people to exclusively by old people? I don't think there's any easy, convenient answer to why and how that happened, but if you folks have got any theories, I would be fascinated to hear them. And one final note on Ozzy Osbourne. I'm not sure how I never heard about this when it happened, but on the day of his funeral at Buckingham Palace, the band of the Coldstream Guards played Paranoid in his honor, and maybe we should play it tonight because it actually sounded pretty awesome. But more importantly, I thought it was a touching gesture on the part of the king, and I think it would have meant a lot to Ozzy. To have begun his life in a one-bedroom flat with an outdoor toilet on the worst street in working-class post-war Birmingham, and to have ended it being paid tribute by the King of England. I think a man like that can fairly say he has done well for himself. Also, one last note on AC/DC. I don't think I ever told the story on this program of my 20-minute long interaction with Malcolm and Angus Young, but if anyone's interested in hearing it, please do remind me during the main body of the show. Anyway, I think that's where the monologue ends, so I will now cease my prattling and convey you into the loving custody of my distinguished colleague, your illustrious co-host, the one and only, your friend and mine, Mr. Caucasian Sasquatch.